I think we'll get started now. I know we've already gotten a lot of messages that this one's going to be viewed on demand because of President's Day. So thank you all of you for joining us. And I'm really excited that, we try to sprinkle in some very, very specific perspectives into this. And so when we were going to do one specifically from the civic perspective, my first message, if not a pleading message, was to one of the people I've learned the most from about this sector. And I dare say, my good friend, Davon Barber, President and CEO of the Downtown Development District of New Orleans. Davon, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Always good to spend time with you.
I'm very excited about this. We're going to do a quick introduction to Placer, as always, for those of you who are new. And then we're going to look at kind of pandemic takeaways. And the idea really is to look at some of the trends we're seeing within this framework of like, what changed, how have we adapted, where do things stand at the moment, and kind of trying to contextualize a lot of the different things we've been seeing. And then, as always, we're going to take your questions. If at any point throughout the conversation you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on how you have a Zoom situated, and we will try to get to as many as possible. As always, quick on Placer, we're a location analytics company. What does that mean? Simplest terms, people vote with their feet. We're showing you how they vote across the United States every single day. We do that by observing a panel of over 30 million devices. Very critically, this is all de-identified aggregate data, so we are GDPR and CCPA compliant. We then utilize machine learning and AI algorithms on top of that panel to make estimations on visits to retail locations across the country. And we present that data in a wealth of different reports within our platform on everything from cross-shopping, visit share, competitive benchmarking, true trade areas, migration analysis, and a whole lot more. If anyone is interested, we do have a free version of our premium product available at placer.ai that you can check out. We also have a section on our website called The Square that is the home to our free tools for those who are interested. But now it's time to dive into the lessons, what we've learned, where we are, and how we are moving forward. And I want to start with kind of how we work, because I think this has been a fundamental shift, and it obviously has huge implications for the civic environment. And, there have been big changes to our patterns. We're going to the office less frequently. We're commuting less as a result. We work from home more. How do you understand the impact of changes like this within the downtown environment?
Well, I think, first of all, the fact that visitation has changed, the way that we do business has certainly changed. Many companies have downsized their spaces, offering hybrid working schedules. And so there's no doubt that from a civic perspective, we can't ignore the fact that the way that we do business has transformed. And so, I constantly think about what does this mean for foot traffic for the small businesses that relied on office workers. In many instances, we had small businesses that were for years so dependent on a captive audience that they didn't necessarily think about their consumer and how to stay engaged with that consumer and their types of products. And I think those businesses have now realized, wait a minute, we need to have a better understanding of who's walking through our doors, who's supplying us. And so we can no longer just sit back and just assume that we'll have a captive audience, but we really have to work to bring in those consumers.
I mean, does it change? I mean, when you think about kind of virtual work, the fact that we're kind of spending our week differently, that kind of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday being big office times, Monday and Friday now kind of being this kind of in-between stage where it's not quite weekend, but it's also not quite the height of the work week. Does it change the way you kind of approach attracting employers to a region?
Sure, I think it does. Certainly for, your traditional central business district, we were very heavy office users. And I think many of us are now looking to diversify our economy. There might be some community that's heavily dependent on healthcare or life science. And those are industries that, requires proximity. So you can't necessarily perform laboratory work at home. You do need the proximity and adjacency to other professionals. It even forces us to think about how the events that we market, as you pointed out, a lot of companies, and we see it in our own community, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are hot. So how do we think about the events that we're producing, making sure that we target those specific days where we can, bring in the most visitation and support the businesses?
That's so interesting. I got a question that came in. It was sent via email. So if you have questions, please send them through the Q&A just so I see them. This one was kind of shared from our ideas at Placer. Does it help to attract more people? So I think what this is saying is is there kind of, I think we've always looked at like kind of attraction of employers.
Mhm.
Is there this element of like attracting employees? Because hey, if you can be hybrid work, why not live in an amazing city like New Orleans?
Mhm. No, absolutely. And fundamentally, from the civic perspective, we're in the business of building a market. We have to accept that. The businesses that are choosing to locate into our communities, they're doing so because they're seeking a compelling reason and a return on investment. And so, given the fact that the market has changed, it's incumbent upon us to help build a market. And so, I think a lot about special events. What can I do to bring events into a community to support and generate demand for that small business, for that restaurant? And so we cannot ignore that. Fundamentally, we're competing for talent, we're competing for the hearts and minds of workers. And so absolutely, we need to be mindful of generating foot traffic.
That's so interesting. I mean, I love that idea of like the business of building a market. I think it's like when you write your book, I feel like that's what it should be called.
I'll
When
take it.
when you think about downtown areas, kind of the future of downtown areas, how has the pandemic changed the way you view that future? What kind of is the key factors that define a downtown area? I mean, has your perspective changed?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will always be bullish on downtowns. I'm unapologetically urban. But again, as I stated before, we have to recognize that we are in competition, and that requires us to pivot. And so, I'm very mindful of, again, the fact that the office market that we know today has changed. And we're starting to see, many communities look at a diversity of land uses in our downtowns, where we were once heavily dependent on the office market. We're now looking at adaptive reuse of office buildings. How do we get more residential in downtown? In fact, there is a national bill moving through Congress right now called the Revitalizing Downtowns Act. This bill, if passed, would essentially provide a tax credit to developers to repurpose office buildings that are older than 25 years old into mixed-use properties. And so I think it's a great tool, a great tactic. We need to double down, again, building up that market. I've seen other communities follow that same, track. Recently, the city of Pittsburgh, for example, their urban redevelopment agency just announced a loan program to assist developers to convert buildings. So, from a land use perspective, I think you're going to increasingly see communities embrace mixed-use development, doubling down on residential development. I also think it's forcing us as civic communities to think through business regulations. How do we make it much more easier for retailers, for restaurants to do business in this new competitive landscape where we've got inflation and other rising costs? And so from a downtown perspective, we have to do everything as possible to be nimble and keep up with some of these trends, fast changing trends, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, you make such a great point, especially with the restaurants. It always pops up the kind of outdoor dining
Mhm.
move that I feel like a lot of cities made very quickly, and we're able to kind of keep a lot of restaurants alive that otherwise wouldn't have made it. I mean, two questions came in. One was a direct question: does Placer allow the tracking of reported crimes in a geographic area? Yes, we do. We have a partner that has crime data, and we align it around a specific area. So that's an easy one. And here, this is a very, very clearly a civic professional. Do you have a multi-county distributed workforce network strategy?
Hmm. Is
I
that for me or for you?
I think that's for you because I don't really understand what it means.
So, well, I will, and hopefully I'm addressing the question. I will certainly say, as a Placer user, it's important for me to understand where our workers reside because that helps me think through my recruitment strategy for our downtown. And so, we utilizing Placer, we do examine the trends of our workers. In fact, we found that 55% of the workers in downtown reside within the city of New Orleans in the community in which I reside. And then the balance of those workers are distributed in the surrounding cities. And so that strategy, again, allows us to pivot accordingly from a marketing perspective. It allows us to better understand where our workers are coming, how much time they're spending in downtown as well, because we're using that information to influence and guide an existing business to help them improve their operations or to target a newcomer into the community. So yes, I would say looking at those patterns is really important.
That's, I mean, a very, very important kind of piece. It's also kind of understanding where the city's pulling from and why, how that's changed and why, I think is like a big question. We're going to get into that a little bit in just a moment. But before we do, one of the areas that I think has seen an impressive return is kind of major events. So professional sports, concerts, you are about to host Mardi Gras this week. What is the kind of the return of these events, the return of the kind of excitement around these events tell you about consumer sentiment, and what do you think cities can do to take advantage?
Sure. Well, I think, from a product standpoint, let's face it, we love sports. Sports is so inherent. I think, especially to the U.S. culture, it drives a lot of activity in our communities. And from a civic perspective, I would urge, my colleagues out there to think about a sports event not only as a single activity, but also the before and after experience. It's that before and after experience that's driving sales for the restaurants, for the retailers. You don't want to, if you live in the suburbs, it's an adventure. You've got the kids, you finally found a babysitter, you can get away. Your mind is set on, okay, maybe let's grab a hotel. Where are we going to grab dinner? Let's grab some drinks after the show. So it's a full experience. And I think that's where we really need to maximize those opportunities.
You're 100% right. I also feel like it's like creative strategies around it. Like we've become a little obsessed with the topic of stadiums, but the amount of times people spend tailgating before a game, even after a game. I want to see pop-up food experiences. I want to see things that are like outside of the bounds of just here's the standard. Create excitement, because that's what's going to, extend it and expand the value to the wider community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we're creatures of social interaction. Let's face it, the pandemic, we were all pent up and, we could not wait to get out and support our favorite sports team. And so I do think that energy is still out there. And there's a strong, whether your team is winning or losing, you're going to get out there, to support them.
Community. It's
Yeah.
something that allows us to come together, and whether it's kind of the band that we all love, the sports team we love,
Yeah.
the city or community we love, I think these events are really powerful in that they kind of empower that community feeling. A couple of really interesting questions came in. What do you think separates office buildings that have done well post-COVID and ones that have not? I will tweak this question a little bit for us, Davon. I'll say, what do you think is going to be the key for office buildings that will do well? Like, let's get speculative here. I mean, I'll start. I actually think it's what you said. I think it's mixed use. Like, I want to see cafes at the top floor of buildings, and I want to see restaurants in the middle, and I want to see a fitness chain at the bottom. And office, if it was 100% office before, I want to see that shrink down, because that makes the office, to steal your civic terminology, that it makes the office a place to visit. It's placemaking within that office setting. I think that's what's going to make offices a draw.
Yeah, well, and I would even add to that, I think, a lot of office owners may have had some deferred maintenance. And so with workers away, that allowed them the time to make upgrades. And so I have been seeing trends where, office developers are retrofitting buildings, putting a new facelift on. Another component that I think, the pandemic showed is the value, the importance of outdoor spaces. And so you're starting to see a number of developers also, particularly of office buildings, retrofit buildings, put in new plazas, new open spaces where workers can congregate. And so I think those types of investments will really position buildings to do better. I think, as office companies, particularly companies looking to move into an area or expand, you're always looking for the glitzy new product. And so from a competitive standpoint, that building that's made those improvements, they're going to stand out.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I also think there's something that, at least we've seen this a little bit where, as the hiring environment becomes a little less advantageous, you are seeing offices start to say, hey, we were 2 days a week, now we're 3. There is this ability of like office buildings to express themselves as a draw. So, hey, you want to be in my building because I'm the place that your employees are going to want to go more often. And I think it's going to allow the strongest to really set themselves apart. I mean, one thing, you can't talk about, migration shift without talking about the suburbs. And I think we've seen across this country kind of migration patterns that show this. Again, it's not abandoning a city altogether, but it's a degree of separation away from kind of the middle urban environment to the suburbs that surround. I think we've seen a lot of indications that this is the pursuit of being able to own a home. It's the pursuit of more space. It's kind of a natural progression, but it's kind of the pace picked up because of the pandemic. What does this shift to the suburbs mean for a greater city area, and how can it be turned into an opportunity?
Sure. Well, I would say, it's not the end of the city. And to your point, yes, this migration is natural. I think, housing affordability with, the employees having the ability to work from home. There's no longer the need to be stuck in traffic. The commute time has been reduced. And so from a particularly a urban location standpoint, I think there's a higher emphasis on providing high quality of life and high quality services. Because face it, I think, we were all frustrated. The pandemic was just so traumatizing for many of us. And so the notion that, oh, my dollars may go more in a suburban location, or I no longer have to deal with some of those inconveniences. That's why it's really incumbent upon us to provide that high quality of life service. And so I've seen some plays from some communities where, companies or particularly downtown organizations offering incentives to workers. Hey, if you work in the office 3 days a week, you qualify for a gift certificate to this restaurant, or some other type of promotional, again, to get them connected to stay within the downtown. So I don't think anyone should panic at this point, but we need to be mindful of these trends, adapt accordingly, and understand that there's constant competition.
Yeah, I mean, a question came in about increase in suburban foot traffic with more people working from home, kind of significant retail location impact. I think the answer to that is to what you just said. I think it's yes, there's some things, for some retailers, for major chains and targeting a certain demographic and a certain type of kind of homeowner. The suburbs are going to be very exciting, but I think the flip side is also true. A lot of the data that we're seeing indicates that cities are getting younger, they're getting a little fresher. That's very exciting for retailers who are targeting Gen. It's very exciting for restaurant concepts that want to be a little bit edgier. I think it's with every trend like this, there's always that give and take. And I think it's on every civic group, every specific city, every specific retailer to ask, where do we fit within that mix?
Yeah, and absolutely, many retailers have been following these migration trends. Again, I keep emphasizing this notion of competition. There are some retailers, for example, particularly in the restaurant category, that have been looking to drive-throughs that are so critical to their operations and expansions. And so they're going to those communities where they're embraced. And so from an urban standpoint, okay, what can we do from a business regulation standpoint? How do we adjust our land use, some of our building requirements to make it much easier for that retailer to succeed? Or embrace some of the new store formats that many restaurants are seeking.
See, I like the format changes and the getting more flexible. I think that's the key. What I always get nervous about is when you over adjust to a trend. So it's there was at one point we were talking the pandemic, everyone's like, there's no need for chairs in a restaurant anymore. All we need is drive-through. It's like, oh, stop. I was like, it needs to be a balance. And I think it's because the draw of people and wanting to be around and the buzz of cities. Another question that came in, I think is really great. What are some of the most important incentive programs that you use, or let's widen it, that you think cities should be looking at right now?
Let's see, most creative incentives. I would say number one, re-examining parking requirements for restaurants and retailers in our community. That's always a high cost. Some other incentives that are very creative, typically I've seen other communities and that I deploy. Here in downtown New Orleans, we offer a facade improvement grant program. So we provide up to $20,000 as a match to a small business or a property owner to make exterior improvements. We also have an outdoor dining grant program. We provide up to $6,000 for the purchase of furniture, equipment, or other items to support outdoor dining. Again, we want vibrancy on the street. We want to see this level of activity. We're about to launch also, and I think some other communities have launched this as well. City of Orlando, I think, has a great program. We're launching a tenant improvement grant program to assist with TI costs, build-out costs. We know that's often an impediment, particularly in urban locations. And so that's, I think, a tool that can be very helpful for retailers as well as restaurant operators.
That's interesting. I think it's fascinating, and I did not get this before joining Placer. The level that those incentives can help smooth out the process of choosing an area, make that choice simpler, expand the opportunity for kind of a restaurant or retailer to thrive in an area. And it's super, super interesting. So, I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about is kind of the urban environment. And I think we kind of mentioned this before, there's a lot of indications that this push to the suburbs is a very specific group, and that kind of cities actually are getting younger and they're more desirable than they were before they're coming back. One of the interesting things is kind of more people in the same number of spaces generally means lots of roommates, which if you lived or grew up around a major city is something you're probably very familiar with. I mean, what's the opportunity that comes with the potential of cities getting a little bit younger? Those with kind of looking for space, going to the suburbs, which is like a degree of separation out. Is it possible that this just becomes like, I don't want to be overly optimistic, but is this potentially just like a net gain overall?
Well, I think it's an opportunity to reinvent ourselves. And at the end of the day, these individuals moving in, these young professionals are consumers. And consumers have the ability to, walk with their dollars. And so, making sure that we are providing a flexible environment that's supporting the trends, the brands that those consumers want in those communities. And so I do think it's a big opportunity for many of us. The urban location, it's always vibrant, it's dynamic. And so many of the retail concepts or trends should reflect that as well to support those retailers. These young professionals that you mentioned, they love proximity. They want to be around people from all different walks of life. They want the arts, they want the creative. And so I think, this mix of uses provides a really unique environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, there are people who are seeking out excitement and kind of art and kind of cutting edge food. I mean, speaks very nicely for New Orleans for those listening, right?
Yeah.
I think one of the things we looked at a lot is obviously the overall retail recovery. And I think the retail recovery has been especially difficult because, returning from COVID was hard. Then there was kind of economic headwinds like rising gas prices, extended inflation. How does a city contribute or play a positive role in helping to reinforce the retail recovery? There's only so much you can do. It's a very volatile, difficult environment, but how can you support that recovery, make it come back faster?
Well, I think, and from a civic perspective, we, control a lot of cards. And as I stated before, we're in the business of building a market. And so helping these businesses get to the finish line, provide a runway for their takeoff. So number one, reevaluating, maybe it's, some of the fees to do business, to operate, to secure a permit, evaluating the time that it takes to get through the permitting process. I'll use the city of Orlando again, which I think is another, again, just best practice. They have a small business practice in their permitting office. So for any tenants occupying space less than 5,000 square feet, those business permits are signed off within 10 days. They have someone that's tracking it, again, making sure that business gets up and running. And so we have to understand it's a really expensive time to do business. We've got inflation. I see a number of memes where I see chickens just living the good life right now because the cost of their eggs have gone up. They're living in their mega mansions now. So that's a direct business cost to a restaurant operator that's then placed on the consumer. So let's make it easier for these businesses to stay open. Again, reevaluating some of the regulations, the time time is money. So let's help those businesses get open as quickly as possible.
I think one of the things we obviously are very oriented towards larger changes because they're easier for us to look at a national scale. But I think when you think about the wider retail ecosystem, so much of it is based on kind of small businesses, that local mom and pop shop, that local restaurant that doesn't have another one. It's just that. How do you support the wider ecosystem? How do you balance the need to support kind of both sides of that equation?
Yeah, I don't think it's an either or proposition. I work with a lot of communities, and I know often there's this healthy tension or debate between, nationals and locals, and even when it boils down into from a recruitment standpoint. And at the end of the day, I think both the large business as well as the small business still requires a regulatory environment that supports their growth. Yes, the smaller businesses may need a little more handholding. Certainly I remember going through the pandemic and helping small businesses secure grants and loans just to stay operational. And so from a civic perspective, I think there may be some tools and resources that may be required to give that business a much longer stay than a national might need. For example, the pandemic, I will tell you, I was not an Instagram guy. But during the pandemic, I started discovering new restaurants because a number of restaurants realized, wait a minute, in order for me to stay, and I should say local small restaurants, in order for me to stay connected to customers and get new consumers, let me showcase my product. And that's how I started learning about restaurants. And so you're starting to see small businesses, I think, particularly the savvy small businesses, understand the importance of maintaining a digital presence. And so conversely, we've seen a number of communities roll out resources to help small businesses get online to make sure that they have an active presence, that their Google site is up to date, customers know their hours of operation. So it's so important. ICSC did a study, consumer survey, a couple of years ago through the pandemic, and that study showed that 79% of consumers stated that the pandemic showed them and reinforced the importance of small businesses in their community. And so now more than ever, we really have to wrap our arms around these businesses.
Yeah, there's also this, I mean, you bring up such an important point of like, if you're a national chain, there's a limitation on how you can be, how local you can be. If you're a small business, that ability to be a part of your community is just enhanced in a really significant manner. And I think that's the trump card that they often kind of hold if they can figure out how to kind of leverage it. One of the things we've also spoken about a lot is kind of the shifting mindset around retail, the kind of the growing focus on like experiences and discovery, the shift. Obviously sales per square foot and sales are still a critical metric, but the if that was the only thing anyone cared about 4 or 5 years ago, that's changing, and there's other things that are being brought into the mix. Does this change the types of retail formats? Does it change, again, like to kind of simplify it even more, like we talk a lot about the rise of the flagship, how major cities and the experience-oriented retail space are both going to rise together. How does that change the way you kind of look at what the urban environment provides for retail?
Yeah, no, for me, I think this is really a sweet spot for urban markets. Experiential retail, experiential retail, experiential retail. That goes into maybe, a local operator who's known for selling skincare products. Well, as a consumer, you not only care about that product, but you want to know the science behind how that product is made, or the health benefits of it. So that shopping experience becomes a huge adventure in and of itself. We've seen breweries and wineries play this, they've been living this playbook for a while. We love our beer. We've seen the rise of breweries and just the tours and just going behind the scenes and seeing that made. And so I think that's a key point for urban locations. You're getting this full rounded experience, even smaller formats as well. Many retailers have been downsizing, going into smaller footprints. Again, urban locations. This is a trend that we cannot ignore. So let's look at repurposing those smaller footprint sites, making it much more easier for some of these brands to move in.
I mean, isn't that like everything? I think you just nailed it so much on the head of like, people come, and I think the other piece is when they come to a city, there's a certain vibe and experience that you benefit from. And anyone who is situated from that kind of emotional connection is going to rise as a result. I think there's just something, figuring out what your presence might look different, but it can't go away. It probably needs to be enhanced. Like you probably need more of it, not less.
Yeah. It's an emotional connection.
It's the biggest thing. And when there's an emotional connection, there's like a real memory. That's the thing that's so special about kind of these places. I want to get to, this is an interesting one. Staffing is a huge problem across retail. What can municipalities do to help?
Oh, this is a great question. I certainly have had my share of shopping recently, and I've gone into stores and, looking for staffing. You can clearly see the downsizing there. I know, labor continues to be an issue for many communities. There may be local incentives that a community can develop, to ensure that certain jobs are maintained, that targeted groups are receiving those job opportunities. So that's an area where I think communities can provide some support. Labor will always be an issue. So whatever the city can do from a regulatory standpoint, incentives, tax credits, making it much easier to retain some of those jobs, providing an environment where workers want to be as well. that worker experience doesn't just stop inside the store, it stops outside of the store as well. When that worker, maybe they're taking public transit or they're parking in a garage, what's the street level experience like? What events and activities are taking place? At the end of the day, I want them to know that the place where they work is exciting also, in and outside the doors.
That's a great point. I think also it segues beautifully into another question that came in. Given that there are fewer visitors, has that changed commuting trends, e.g. public transportation, Uber, etc.? We actually did some analysis on this recently, and we found that there are some really interesting changes, and that with people coming less, there does appear to be more willingness to drive and sit in traffic because they're coming in less often. They're also, I'm sure part of that is like a remnant of the pandemic and kind of, hey, should we be around so many people in such a closed space? But public transportation seems to be rising as part of like the weekend mix. So people are like, oh, we're going into the city, let's take public transport. How do trends like that kind of, or how do you even view the progression of public transport in kind of this post-COVID environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the pandemic, made many of us much more hypersensitive to, sanitation and just our overall health. And so we did see a decline throughout the pandemic, understandably. Vaccinations have rolled out, so many of us, I think, are much more comfortable being out in public places, being on transit. And I think we will see that rise. I was in New York City recently, and I loved a promotion I saw on Sundays. The Metro MTA, they're offering free transit rides into the city, which I thought which was a great ploy or tactic to get people to enjoy the restaurants, the businesses in the city, to drive traffic. I think other communities could also follow a similar playbook as well. Right now here, in New Orleans, it's Mardi Gras season, so we've got lots of riders, making sure that our transit apps are up and working accordingly, making it easier for them to take advantage of public transportation. So these are ways that cities can help out.
I keep on imagining what you have to deal with in the next week, and I'm so excited for you because it's going to be amazing. But it feels like a lot. I think one of the topics we've been talking about a lot, that actually, as we were kind of preparing for this webinar, kind of we started thinking about within the framework of kind of the civic perspective, was kind of retail media. And retail media basically says, stop looking at store visits just for sales. Think about the impressions. Think about how powerful it is that people come into your doors. I think that's even more so for the downtown environment. Like, it's not just about how many people visit a retail shop, how many dollars are spent in that area. It's the fact that downtown New Orleans is such a draw, and it has such this emotional experience that it provides. It's bigger than just the visit. How do you express that? How do you see that kind of this impression perspective? We brought up Instagram before, becoming a bigger part of the civic storytelling.
Oh, it's a great question. It's important. I've been doing a lot of retail work for a number of years, and what I love about retail site selection, the science behind it. There's an art to it, but it's so complex. It's not like a straight office deal. Retail, it's also about lifestyle as well. And so understanding the consumer, their preferences, their shopping preferences, what they're saying online, the stores that they like to shop, where they like to shop, the co-tenancy, that affects as well. And so we want to better understand what people are saying, when are they saying it, because that information is so pivotal to the next deal. And so that's why, as an organization, we've been investing so much in building our research capacity, building up, work with Placer as well, with our research analytics. So it's so important to us to understand that.
And so one of the, we'll do this in two parts, but one of my favorite questions to ask is to kind of look back and ask what that means looking forward. So for you, what is the biggest lesson that civic professionals need to learn from 22 in 2023?
I would say adapt or quickly fail. We are seeing restaurants and retailers quickly adapt, and we must throw out a lot of us have had, zoning regulations or master plans that have been on the books 10, 20 years. We have to start looking at our zoning and these other plans maybe on a 1-year cycle, 5-year cycle. We have to adapt very, very quickly. I'll just use an example. I know of one community, one national retailer that's looking at smaller footprint, restaurant operator, smaller footprints, and they're looking to roll out walk-up storefronts because their data has shown them that their customers like to walk up and just pick up the food. Order online, they're embracing technology, just want to quickly grab that food. Unfortunately, in this particular community, the zoning regulations do not allow for a walk-up. And so again, we have to look at if we want business in our community, let's be a little more flexible and adaptive. Another community in which I've worked, shockingly, a major corridor, we were looking to update the zoning to allow for a yoga studio to be placed. And so, updating our land use and to allow for the types of complementary business uses within a community. So adapt, adapt, adapt. I cannot say this enough.
Oh, it's such a good one. I also feel like it's like learning to embrace failure a little bit better. Like you see it a lot in the retail environment. People will see a new concept and they'll dump all over it. And you're like, it's new. Why are we expecting it to be good? Try things like that's have a real thesis, test it. Some of it's going to work amazingly, some of it's not. But if you're not trying things, you're kind of like doomed to this at best plateauing. And then last
outdoor,
question.
I would say, Ethan, outdoor dining, that was a perfect example of community saying we can pull this off. I'm sure it was quite frightening at first to thought, how do we do this? How do we get out dining in the sidewalks? It worked out well, and it's proven that it works.
And it was again, like, I don't think like gyms too. How many gyms were allowed to like kind of utilize outdoor spaces? Yeah. That wasn't, I think it's what's crazy is you think about decisions like that were clearly difficult to make. They saved businesses. Like many businesses were saved because of those decisions. The last question for me, and then we'll go into a few more that we haven't gotten to yet from kind of the audience. One bold expectation for 2023.
Ooh, let's see. I'm not good at predictions. Let's see, a bold expectation. Let's come back to this one.
Deal.
Okay.
All right. A couple of questions that have come in. See, this kind of come from a good friend wrote in, adapt or quickly fail, best line of the webinar. I agree, but it's only a little bit behind the business of building a market, which to me is my favorite thing. All right. Any specific development that historic towns like that New Orleans can pursue with dual goals, becoming anti-fragile or more resilient to future hurricanes, while also enabling retail foot traffic to resume at the earliest after future natural hazards? It's a complicated question. I assume that, I think, if I apologize if I'm misinterpreting your question to the individual who asked, how do you balance kind of retail attraction and the things you're doing while building a more resilient environment, considering kind of the threat of natural disasters?
Oh, great. So great question. As I stated before, and from a Civic perspective, we are building a market. And so, we can chew gum and still walk down the street at the same time from a recruitment standpoint. And so on the resiliency side, one of the largest projects we're actually taking on as an organization is a major stormwater management program for our downtown. And so we are providing funding to our city of we're issuing bonds, providing funding to our city's public works department to make improvements to about 19 blocks within our downtown. We're deploying these upgrades in concert, again, to help us better attract retail, because we know that sometimes there are concerns about resiliency, the ability to bounce back from a natural disaster. We want our existing businesses to remain operational throughout this construction, making sure that we're staging it so that we're minimizing any disruption. But at the end of the day, we're trying to build a market and strengthen the working environment for these businesses.
And with that, Devon, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it on a very busy week for you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ethan. Always great to spend time with you.
I love it. And happy President's Day, everyone. For those of you who will be asking at some point, yes, the recording will be available by start of day tomorrow morning, Eastern time. Look out for our next webinar. It's going to be in early March. We're going to be focusing on digitally native brands with our friends, Melissa Gonzalez from the Lioness Group and Rebecca Fitz from Leap. So please join us then. Thank you so much for joining us today and have a wonderful week. Thank you all so much.